Chapter 1. I'm finally out. David Chen breathed in the fresh air outside and shouted with all his might. Behind David is Horrendal Prison. He stayed here for 3 years and was finally released today after serving his sentence. Hey, I don't know what happened to your parents. David carried a ragged canvas bag and hurried to the house. His parents had never seen him once in 3 years, and now David was very worried about them. On the way home, he kept looking at the bronze ring he was wearing. The ring is engraved with a lifelike dragon, and there is a command word at the position of the dragon head. This ring was given to him by his fellow inmate Irvin Lau when he was released from prison today. This Irvin is a very strange person. He talks about it all day long, saying that he is the master of the dragon sect, who knows astronomy and geography, and is proficient in forensic medicine, which can bring people back to life. Everyone regarded this Irvin as a lunatic and didn't want to pay attention to him. Only David would chat with him when he had nothing to do, and he even gave him some of his meals. Irvin told David some strange things every day, about Dragon Sect, about Dragon Island, things David had never heard of. Later, the old master asked David to accompany him to meditate and practice the exercises every day. David was also bored, so he learned along with him. But who knows, 3 years later, David actually followed the old Irvin to practice his skills and medical skills. Just when he was released from prison today, Irvin handed the ring to him and told him that on July 15 this year, go to an unnamed island in the East China Sea no matter what. As long as he arrives on the island, show the ring, someone will pick him up, and then he will have a big chance. Because he did learn a lot from Irvin, David believed in Irvin's words and agreed, but there are still several months before July 15. Before he knew it, David had already walked to the door of the house, looking at the dilapidated house in front of him. His face was complicated. He didn't know what happened to his parents in the past 3 years. Because of his impulsiveness, his parents would have been under a lot of pressure. Thinking back 3 years ago, David's eyes are still flashing with anger. 3 years ago, he and his girlfriend Delia Zheng had reached the point of talking about marriage. The two were college classmates and had been talking for 2 years. But one day, on the night of sending Delia home, the two met a drunk Jordan. This Jordan is a famous second-generation rich in Horrendal, and he has done all the bad things. As a result, when Jordan saw that Delia was beautiful, he became ill-intentioned, and started to act on Delia. As a well-known local rich second generation, Jordan Xiao didn't even look at David at all. Seeing his girlfriend being insulted, David went crazy. Picked up a brick and smashed it on Jordan's head. The results are predictable. The powerful and influential Jordan was beaten. Of course, he would not let it go, and directly called the police and arrested David. Sentenced to 3 years in prison for intentional injury. It was not until today that David was released. After hesitating for a long time, David gently knocked on the door. Who is it? The door opened, and an old woman with white hair and a rickety figure stuck her head out, groping forward with one hand. Who is knocking on the door? The old woman's eyes were closed, and it was obvious that she couldn't see anything, so she was blind. When David looked at the old woman in front of him, he was stunned, his eyes were wide open, and his whole body was shaking slightly. He couldn't believe that this old woman with white hair and a wrinkled face in front of him was actually his mother, Barbara Tang. In just 3 short years, how did his mother become like this? Mom, it's me, I'm David. He stepped forward to support his mother and shouted excitedly. David. Is it really you? Barbara touched David's face with both hands, and the tears couldn't stop flowing. Mom, it's me, it's me. David's eyes were also red. Mom, what's wrong with you? What's wrong? David didn't understand. His mother was fine when he left. Why did she become like this in just 3 years? Hey, it's a long story, come on in. Barbara pulled David into the room. Looking at the humble room, almost empty, David was dumbfounded. Although their family is not rich, but his father has a formal job, so it is still possible to achieve a well-off life, but how has the family become like this now? Mom, what happened at home? When David saw the appearance of the family, he asked his mother. Hey. Barbara sighed. After you left. Barbara recounted the matter from start to end. It turned out that after David was imprisoned, the Xiao family did not intend to let them go, and demanded compensation of 1 million. In the end, there was no way. David's parents sold his marriage house and borrowed a lot of money. But they still couldn't collect enough. In the end, the remaining 300,000, they could only pay the Xiao family in installments. For this reason, David's father's job was also gone, and he could only make a living by sweeping the streets. While his mother washed her face with tears all day long, and her eyes got blinded by crying. This is why David was imprisoned for 3 years, but his parents never saw him once. Listening to his mother's remarks, David slowly clenched his fists, and there was a majestic killing intent in the depths of his eyes. He didn't expect this Shao family to be so cruel. This is to kill their family. Mom, doesn't that Delia care about you at all? David asked with a puzzled face. That Delia is his wife who is about to go through the door, and he is imprisoned for that Delia. It is impossible for Delia to look at her parents like this and be indifferent, right? Oh, don't mention it. The Zhang family doesn't care. Even the dowry we gave, I wanted to come back, but they didn't give it. They said it wasn't their fault that they couldn't get married. It's because you're in jail, so the dowry won't be returned. Your dad asked them for a theory, and they were beaten up by their family. The more Barbara spoke, the more bitter her heart became, and in the end she couldn't stop her tears. Chapter 2. Then the Zhang family is really like this. David's brows were tightly knit together. He couldn't believe that Delia was really like this. When he was arrested, Delia cried and said that she would wait for him to come out, and the two are getting married. How did it become like this? David decided to ask Delia to clarify. But at this moment, the door was suddenly slammed with force, so strong that it almost knocked the door off. Hearing the knock on the door, Barbara's face suddenly turned pale, and he could see that she was very scared. Mom, who is this? Seeing Barbara's expression, David asked with a frown. Don't worry about it. Go back to the room quickly. Don't come out. Barbara pushed David into the room and opened the door nervously. The door had just opened, and a bald guy with 4 or 5 tattoos and a fierce face walked in. How is the money prepared? The bald head looked at Barbara and asked. Brother Bald, everything is ready, ready. Barbara kept nodding, reaching out and groping to take out a cloth bag from the corner. At this time, many neighbors in the neighborhood also gathered around, looking at the bald-headed people. They all hid far away. These guys come to ask for money every month. They really want to kill people. No, there is no law at all. Shish, keep your voice down. These guys are all sent by the Shao family to collect money on a regular basis. A few neighbors hid aside and talked angrily, but no one dared to care. At this moment, the bald head grabbed the cloth bag in Barbara's hand, opened it, and glanced at it. What the H3LL is this? The bald head frowned and turned the bag over. There were some old banknotes scattered all over the floor. There were 100, 50, 1 or 2, and even many more. Gross coins. Can these junk be worth 10,000? The bald head asked Barbara loudly. Brother Bald, it's exactly 10,000. We've counted it. You can count it if you don't believe me. Barbara accompanied her smile, nodded and bowed. F. Art. The bald head kicked Barbara's abdomen, and she directly hit the ground. Let me count. I don't have the time, so give me 100 bills. Mom. David rushed out of the back room and hurriedly helped Barbara up. The cold eyes swept across the bald people, and the eyes flashed with coldness. The bald-headed people were stunned for a moment, and they all shuddered under David's eyes. David, who told you to come out? Hurry into the room, don't worry. Barbara desperately pushed David into the room. Mom, since I'm out, let me handle this matter. You sit down. David helped Barbara sit on the stool, then turned around and looked at the bald head coldly. The bald head glanced at David, and said with a sneer. Isn't this the guy who hit Master Shao with a brick and served 3 years in prison? I didn't expect him to come out. It's really time to come out. Today is the big day for your girlfriend and young Master Shao to get married. Isn't the ex-boyfriend going to participate? Green Hat Turtle. Ha ha ha. The bald head and a few men all burst into laughter. What did you say? David frowned, his eyes full of disbelief. I said that the woman you are in jail for her is going to marry young Master Shao today. The wedding will be held at the Regal Hotel, but it's luxurious. Why don't you go take a look? The bald head looked at David with a sneering expression. David's brows furrowed even tighter, his hands clenched tightly into fists. Behind him, Barbara's face changed, and she was shaking with anger. After all, her son was imprisoned because of that Delia, but she didn't expect this woman to turn her head and marry her enemy. You kneel down and apologize to my mother, and I can spare your life. A cold glow flashed in David's eyes, and the killing intent rose from his body. The temperature in the room suddenly dropped a bit, and the laughter of the bald people stopped abruptly. After a while, the bald head reacted and said angrily, "What did you say? You asked me to kowtow and apologize." With that, the bald head, he smashed David with a punch. With David's small figure, this punch can make David fall to the ground. Bang. But who knows, when the bald head just rushed up, David kicked out. The bald man suddenly fell to the ground, clutching his crotch, sweating profusely in pain, and screaming constantly. "David, you can't fight anymore." Listening to the wailing of the bald head, Barbara hurriedly shouted at David. David was imprisoned because of the attack. It just came out. If he was sent in because of the fight, would it still be worth it? "Kill him for me, kill him." The bald head roared and stared at David viciously. Several bald men rushed towards David. David glanced at his mother, his hands suddenly flicked, and several white lights flashed. And all those people felt their legs numb, and they all fell to the ground. This time, the bald head was startled and looked at David in disbelief. A chill came out of his heart. The neighbors outside saw the scene in front of them, their eyes widened, and some couldn't believe it. "Apologize to my mother." David's icy voice sounded again. The bald head hesitated for a moment, but seeing David's cold eyes, he could only kneel on the ground. "Sorry." The bald head and a few of his subordinates began to apologize. "Go away." David waved his hand. He didn't want to kill in front of the neighbors and his mother. If he wanted to kill these little gangsters, it was just a matter of snapping his fingers. The bald head was supported by his subordinates and stood up, gave David a vicious look. And they limped away. Obviously he was not convinced, but David was not afraid of the bald head's revenge. Chapter 3. Mom, are you okay? Those people are gone. After leaving Bald, David asked Barbara with concern. "Hey. You said you just came out. What did you provoke him to do?" Barbara complained to David. "Quickly pick up the money on the ground, we have saved it all." David squatted down and collected the scattered banknotes on the ground. "Mom, I'll just make money in the future, you and Dad have a good rest, and I'll find a way to make your eyes look good to you." David collected the money and handed the bag to Barbara. "You can do it if you have the heart," Barbara said, and even started to cry. "You are back now, and Mom is relieved. If I hadn't been thinking about you these past few years, Mom would have died." Looking at his mother, David's eyes began to turn scarlet. Bang. David couldn't bear it any longer, and punched the only table. Wow. The table was smashed to pieces in an instant. "Xiao family. Zheng family. I will definitely make you pay the price, definitely." The anger on David's face was raging. Seeing to feel David's anger, Barbara hurriedly said, "David, you must not cause trouble. Now that you are out, find a job, everything will be fine." "Mom, don't worry, I know what to do, I'll go out." David comforted his mother, and then walked out of the house. He was going to go to Delia to ask what was going on. After walking out of the house, David was still full of anger. But just as he was crossing the road, suddenly a red Porsche rushed over from the road, and the speed was very fast, directly knocking David into the air. Bang. David's body fell heavily to the ground. If he hadn't practiced with the old master, it would have killed him. Who can drive without eyes? David was originally angry, but when he went out, he was knocked out, and he was even more angry. How the H3LL do you walk without eyes? Just as David scolded angrily and was about to stand up, there was a sudden scream. Saw a girl getting off the Porsche. The girl was wearing a white dress and walking on a pair of high-heeled shoes. She was very beautiful, but at this time she was looking at David angrily. David frowned, and the body that wanted to stand up lay back again. Who of us doesn't have eyes? It's obviously you who bumped into me. You are a pretty girl, why do you smell like shish? Tea when you talk. David said to the girl without showing weakness. You dare to scold me? The girl glared at David, suddenly raised her foot and kicked him over. The high-heeled shoes the girl wears are like sharp knives. If they hit a body, there will be a blood hole. Sonia, stop. Seeing that the girl was about to kick David, a middle-aged man opened the car door and got out of the back seat. The middle-aged man has an aura of indifference and self-arrogance. At first glance, he looks like a person who has been in a high position for a long time. It's just that the middle-aged man at this time was a little pale, and his breathing was short. After shouting this sentence, he held the car door and gasped continuously. Dad, why did you come down? After the girl saw the middle-aged man, she hurriedly ran over and asked the middle-aged man. Let's go to the hospital quickly, don't waste time. the middle-aged man said to the girl. The girl nodded, walked to David again, took out a wad of money from her bag, and threw it on him. There are 10,000 here, quickly take the money and leave, we are in a hurry. David didn't go to get the money, but stood up and glanced at the middle-aged man not far away and said, "You don't have to go to the hospital, it's too late." After David finished speaking, he turned around and was about to leave. He could see that this middle-aged man was already in danger, and he couldn't make it to the hospital at all. "Stop." The girl stopped directly in front of David and glared angrily. "What do you mean? Tell me clearly, or you don't want to leave." At this time, the middle-aged man also frowned and walked a few steps towards David. "Your father suffers from a hidden illness. He was injured in his left lung. Within 5 minutes, he would have difficulty breathing and suffocate to death. Can you be in the hospital in 5 minutes?" David calmly followed the girl and asked. "You are talking nonsense, my father just has a cold." "Sonia." The middle-aged man stopped the girl, and then took 2 steps toward David again, his eyes full of shock. "Little brother, how did you see that my left lung is injured?" "I told you, but you don't understand. I'm in a hurry right now, so I don't have time to waste time with you guys," David said. He was about to turn around and leave. "Little brother, cough cough." The middle-aged man called David, then coughed violently, and when it calmed down a little, he immediately stepped forward and pulled David's arm. "Little brother, since you can see if I get sick, it will definitely be cured. I hope my little brother can save my life. I am willing to pay any price. This is my business card." The middle-aged man took out a business card and handed it to David. Originally, David didn't want to not care, but when he saw the name on the business card, he immediately took the business card in his hand. "Are you Reuben Sue, president of the Sue Group?" "Exactly." Reuben nodded. Suddenly, David shot at Reuben, pointing at Reuben some particular acupoints. David's speed was so fast that neither Reuben nor Sonia could react. Chapter 4. What do you want to do? Sonia hurriedly stepped forward to block Reuben, but David had already stopped at this time. However, after David hit a few acupuncture points, Reuben immediately felt that his breathing was smooth and his face was much more rosy. "I only temporarily controlled your injury. It will take some time to heal. Your hidden disease needs to be slowly recuperated because of its age," David said lightly. "Thank you, little brother, for your help. Thank you so much." Reuben stepped forward and grabbed David's hand excitedly, thanking him constantly. Sonia was very surprised to see that her father's face was obviously rosy and his body was much better. "I shot to save you because I know that you often do good deeds, and you have donated more to than a dozen elementary schools. I did it all because of that reason." The reason why David rescued Reuben was because he knew that Reuben was a good man. If he met by chance and had no acquaintance, David would not necessarily rescue him, not to mention that Sonia had just talked badly to him and almost hit him. David is not TCH, to save anyone. When Reuben heard this, he was a little embarrassed. "What kind of good deed I have done is far from good. Little brother saved my life." "Just say whatever you want. Now it's noon, I invite little brother to a meal at the Regal Hotel." "No, I still have something to deal with." David shook his head and refused, and he still wanted to see Delia to clarify. Seeing David's refusal, Reuben was a little surprised. Must know that as the richest man in Horrendal, there are countless people who want to invite him to dinner, and those who can sit with him for dinner are all powerful people. Now he took the initiative to invite David to dinner, but David refused, which was a bit unexpected. "Little brother, say we have to sit and have a meal together to express my gratitude." Reuben held David's arm tightly. David could see that Reuben desperately wanted to invite him to dinner, just wanting to know about the follow-up treatment of his illness. But seeing Reuben as sincere, David nodded and said, "Well, I'll deal with the matter first. Then I will go to the Regal Hotel to find you." Seeing David say this, Reuben released his hand. "Well, it's a deal, just call me." David nodded and left impatiently, rushing towards the Zheng family. "Where's Delia? I want to see her." In front of a slightly old villa, David said to the middle-aged woman in front of him. This middle-aged woman is Delia's mother, Ethel Jha. If it was before, David would never have dared to speak to her in such a tone. But now, after listening to his mother's remarks, David was very angry and did not act directly. Even if it is good. Ethel was wearing a cheongsam, arrogant, crossed her hands on her chest, and looked at David with disdain. "Hurry up and get out of my way. My daughter is getting married today. You are too bad here as a prisoner of labor." "Marrying?" David frowned. It seemed that what the bald head said was true. Where is Delia? Who is she marrying? Let her come out to meet me and make it clear. David rushed towards the villa with a cold face. Hey, you lunatic, how can you break into other people's yards casually? Ethel pulls David desperately. But where can she compete with David's strength? The whole person was dragged into the yard by David. David was about to rush in with his eyes open. At this time, a girl in a wedding dress walked out with a gloomy face. When he saw the girl, David suddenly stopped. Delia, what's going on? What's going on? Can you explain it to me? David waited for his eyes angrily and questioned Delia. David, let's go, don't come looking for me, I have decided to marry Jordan. Delia looked at David expressionlessly and said. David's eyes narrowed and his fists clenched tightly. Although he already knew it, when Delia said it herself, David's heart twitched fiercely. He was imprisoned by that Jordan, but now his girlfriend is going to marry him. This is so ironic. Suddenly, David laughed bitterly at himself. He felt that he was really too cheap. Is that what you mean? David looked at Delia. There was no anger on his face, and his hands slowly loosened. Yes. Delia nodded. I want to have a rich life, but you can't give it to me at all. And you are still a prisoner of labor reform. Even if you come out, I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to support yourself. What will you support me with? For the sake of our previous relationship, you can take these hundreds of dollars and sleep on the streets of the province. After Delia finished speaking, she took out a few hundred bills from her bag and threw them on David's face. At this moment, David looked at her and gave up completely. The person in front of him was no longer his girlfriend. You will regret this. David turned around and left without taking Delia's money. Huh, you will regret marrying this poor ghost. Ethel spat fiercely in the back. Chapter 5. When David just walked to the door, a convoy of greetings directly blocked the way. A young man in a suit and leather shoes walked down from the float with a bouquet of flowers in his hand. This person was Jordan. Jordan was slightly taken aback when he saw David, but then he laughed out loud. I forgot that you were released from prison today. What a coincidence. Would you like to join me in Delia's wedding? Jordan looked at David playfully, his eyes full of ridicule. David just glanced at Jordan coldly, turned sideways and wanted to leave. He didn't want to talk nonsense with such a person. Don't go. Jordan stopped David again. Do you have no money to follow? It doesn't matter, you don't need to take the money, you can eat the leftovers at that time. We are holding the wedding at the Regal Hotel. If you don't come this time, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to eat there in the future. Jordan smirked at David, and even reached out and patted David's face. David knocked Jordan's hand off with all his strength. Marry a second-hand one, there is nothing to worry about, it's all left by me. David smiled coldly. In fact, David never touched Delia at all, and he didn't even pull his hand. He said this to disgust Jordan, and to rectify that Delia by the way. Jordan was stunned after hearing this, and hurriedly looked at Delia. Delia told him that she never even held hands with David. What's the situation now? Seeing Jordan look over, Delia became anxious and shouted at David. David, what nonsense are you talking about? Who is left by you to play? Just your virtue, I didn't let you go. Touched. Ethel also panicked, and yelled at David. David, don't eat grapes and say grapes are sour. With your virtue, how could my daughter let you touch? Jordan, don't believe his nonsense, he made it clear that he wanted to disgust you. Ethel explained to Jordan that she finally found a golden tortoise-in-law, but she couldn't be disturbed by David's words. Auntie, don't worry, I won't believe it. Jordan is not stupid, and of course he will not trust David's words. Believe it or not. David was too lazy to pay attention to Jordan, so he bypassed him and walked out. Wait a moment. Jordan stopped David. You'd better keep your mouth under control, don't speak ill of my wife everywhere, or I'll make you look good. Jordan was afraid that David would talk nonsense everywhere and ruin the reputation of their Shao family. Hee hee, the mouth is on me, I can say whatever I want, just say it, you care about me. David looked at Jordan coldly. But you have to pay attention, don't lose your life one day, I don't know what happened. Looking at David's cold eyes, Jordan was in a trance for a moment, and there was a trace of fear in his heart. But just for a moment, Jordan felt that he had been humiliated, his eyes widened and he reprimanded, if you kid is not afraid of death, you can try it, then don't kneel down and beg me. Jordan's face was full of anger. If it wasn't for him getting married today, he would have given David a good look. I don't know who knelt down and begged whom. Let's wait and see. David stared at Jordan. Jordan, the time has come, let's not pay attention to this poor five-tard, stupid X. Ethel gave David a look of contempt. Jordan held the flowers, and the group walked towards the house. David looked at Jordan's back, and suddenly flicked his fingers, and a silver light suddenly entered Jordan's body. Jordan shuddered obviously, but he didn't care and continued to walk into the room. I want to see if you will kneel down and beg me. A sneer appeared on the corner of David's mouth. He turned and left, heading towards the Regal Hotel. The entrance of the Regal Hotel. Reuben personally waited for David at the door, and Reuben's appearance made everyone who entered the Regal Hotel have a lot of discussion. Isn't this the richest man, Sue? He is standing at the door of the hotel, as if waiting for someone. I don't know what the other party's background is, and he could make the richest man wait for him. I heard that the eldest son of the Xiao family is getting married, and the wedding will be held here. Isn't it someone who is waiting for the Xiao family? It's possible. After all, the Xiao family is also a wealthy family, so they should give some face. Everyone walked into the Regal Hotel talking, but Reuben was still hovering at the door, looking at his watch from time to time. His face became a little impatient. Dad, I think that kid is talking nonsense. He said that you injured your left lung, and you still have a hidden disease that is life-threatening. It's just nonsense. You just had cold and your lungs are inflamed. Don't wait, let me accompany you to the hospital. Sonia persuaded Reuben. Reuben has been waiting here for half an hour, but before David arrived, Sonia felt that David was talking nonsense. Besides, Reuben never told them that he had injured his left lung, and he had never seen this before. A situation. Sonia, there are some things you don't understand. My injury, even if I get to the hospital, it's not good at all. I have a hidden disease. It's been more than 20 years. The reason why I haven't told you is because I'm afraid you worry about. Reuben sighed and said solemnly. When Sonia heard this, her whole body became a little stupid, and she nervously took Reuben's hand. Dad, what the H3LL is going on? Don't scare me, don't scare me. I've already called Dr. Sun. Call, he came right away. Sonia panicked. Since she can remember, she has never seen her mother. It was Reuben who brought her up and the two depended on each other for life. If Reuben had 3 strengths and 2 weaknesses, Sonia didn't know how to live on her own. It's a long story, but when I have time, Dad is slowly telling you. After Reuben finished speaking, he looked at his watch again, and then looked anxiously into the distance. Chapter 6. When he saw David's figure appear, Reuben instantly became excited and ran directly towards David. Little brother, you are finally here, please come in quickly. Reuben took David's hand, and he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Mr. Sue, since I promised you, I will definitely come. David knew that Reuben was afraid of letting him go. Reuben showed a hint of embarrassment and could only smile. Little brother, please, please. Reuben kept his posture very low, which made people who came to the hotel guess David's identity after seeing it. Then Sonia saw that David's back was upright, while her father was low, and she was instantly furious. What's the matter with you, boy? My dad has been waiting for you at the door for more than half an hour. And you look at my dad's, the complexion is obviously getting more and more worse. Will you treat the disease? Sonia had a deep opinion on David. At first, David controlled Reuben's condition. Sonia was also surprised, thinking that David really had 2 strokes. But it didn't take long. Reuben's original rosy face became more and more ugly, which made Sonia think that David was a liar. Maybe he was cheating money. Sonia, don't be ridiculous. Hurry up and apologize to the little brother. Reuben's face turned cold and he roared at Sonia. I'm not going to apologize to him. Look at his hair. He hasn't grown all of his hair. What kind of genius doctor could he be? I think he's a big liar. Sonia looked at David coldly. She felt that the reason why Reuben did not go to the doctor was because of David. Seeing that Sonia was disobedient, Reuben's face instantly flushed with anger, and his breathing began to become rapid. Cough, cough, cough. Reuben wanted to say something, but without saying a word, he began to cough violently. Dad. Sonia rushed over and supported Reuben. And Reuben coughed out a mouthful of black blood, which frightened Sonia so much that her face changed. Seeing the black blood that Reuben coughed up, David's brows instantly wrinkled. It seems that Reuben's injury is more serious than he imagined. David doesn't know how Reuben can survive such a serious injury up to now. Hurry up and help your dad to the room. David said to Sonia, who had already panicked. But Sonia was stunned and didn't move, because she didn't trust David very much. Seeing that Sonia didn't move, David frowned and said sternly, "Do you want to watch your father die?" Sonia was yelled at by David, and then she supported Ruben and walked into a box of the hotel. After entering the box, David called Ruben's pulse, and his expression became solemn. Just when David was about to treat Ruben, the box door was suddenly pushed open, and a doctor wearing glasses and a white coat walked in. "Dr. Sun, hurry up, look at my dad, he just vomited blood." After Sonia saw the person who came, she seemed to have caught a life-saving straw. "What? Let me see." Dr. Sun was startled and hurriedly opened the medicine box. "Get out of the way." Sonia pushed David aside, then supported Ruben and said to Dr. Sun, "Dr. Sun, my father's illness treatment depends on you, you must save him." At this time, Ruben was almost in a coma, and his breathing became very weak. "Don't worry, Miss Sue, I will do my best," Dr. Sun said, and began to take the pulse of Ruben. As the pulse time got longer and longer, Dr. Sun's brows became deeper and deeper. Sonia looked at Dr. Sun's appearance with a worried face and did not dare to say anything. "Ms. Sue, he ha injured the spleen and lungs, causing hidden diseases. This accumulated chronic disease must be managed slowly, but someone forcibly stimulated Mr. Su's immunity. Although it seems to be effective for the time being, but this has aggravated President Su's condition, and I'm afraid that President Su is now in danger." "Before me, who actually treated President Su?" Dr. Sun said solemnly. When Sonia heard this, she was instantly furious, and looked directly at David, who had just treated her father. At that time, as Dr. Sun said, her father's condition improved a lot, but didn't expect it. This killed his own father. "You liar, if my father has 3 strengths and 2 weaknesses, I will never spare you." Sonia yelled at David, her face full of anger. If it wasn't because she couldn't get away from supporting Ruben, it is estimated that Sonia would have done something to David. "Why do you call me a liar? What did I lie to your family for? If it weren't for me, your father would have been a corpse by now. It's unreasonable." David snorted coldly, disgusting Sonia very much. "A girl's family, just open her mouth and shut her mouth as a liar. How can there be a little girl's tenderness? You." Sonia was furious, but she couldn't quarrel with David at this time. It was the most important thing to save her father first. "Dr. Sun, please, think of a solution quickly, please." Sonia was about to cry in a hurry. Dr. Sun opened the medicine box, took out a black pill and stuffed it into Ruben's mouth, and then took out a pack of silver needles. In Ruben's sink, Tianai, and the feet were punctured in several acupoints. "You are not saving people by doing this, you are harming people." David looked at Dr. Sun's acupuncture and said calmly. Dr. Sun frowned. "What do you mean? Are you questioning me? Could it be that you can't do acupuncture? Acupuncture is traditional medicine. It is not like Western medicine. You can become proficient in 3 or 5 years of study. Acupuncture and moxibustion in traditional medicine may be difficult to get started without taking 10 or 8 years. It may take decades to master it. I have studied all my life, but I dare not say that I am proficient." But David looked at the age of only about 20. Even if he learned acupuncture from his mother's womb, how could he be so smart? Chapter 7. What nonsense are you talking about? I don't need you here, get out of here. Sonia was afraid that David would influence Dr. Sun to see a doctor, so she roared angrily. Okay, this is what you told me to get out of. I'm sitting in the corridor outside, and within 5 minutes, you'll beg me to come back. After David finished speaking, he opened the box door and walked out. When David walked back, no one cared about him. Then Dr. Sun began to carefully acupuncture Ruben, and soon he was sweating profusely. After the last needle was pierced, Ruben woke up and slowly opened his eyes. Dad, my dad is awake. Dr. Sun, my dad is awake, it's great. Seeing Ruben awake, Sonia shouted happily, her eyes filled with tears. She was really scared just now, afraid that her father would never wake up again. When Dr. Sun saw that Ruben was awake, he also let out a long sigh of relief. In fact, he was not sure. But when Sonia and Dr. Sun both breathed a sigh of relief, Ruben, who had already opened his eyes, suddenly trembled violently. His expression was very painful, they were in difficulty with each other, and the whole face turned purple. Dad, Dad, Sonia shouted loudly, looking at Dr. Sun in a panic. Dr. Sun, what's going on? At this time, Dr. Sun was also a little flustered, and seemed at a loss. I don't know, how can this happen, how can this happen? Who are you asking? You're a doctor. Sonia was in a hurry and shouted at Dr. Sun. At this time, Ruben's shaking became smaller and smaller, and finally there was no movement, and he couldn't even detect his breathing. This time, Dr. Sun panicked even more. If Ruben had any good or bad, he probably wouldn't think about it. Dad, don't scare me, don't scare me. Sonia cried. Miss Sue, let's send President Sue to the hospital, I have no choice. Dr. Sun said anxiously. The reason why he chose to send Ruben to the hospital at this time was simply to avoid responsibility. If Ruben died in the hospital, it had nothing to do with him. Do you think I'm stupid? Can my dad still go to the hospital in this situation? Hurry up and save my dad. If you can't save my dad, don't live anymore. Sonia had lost her mind at this time, and said with anger in her eyes. The Su family is the richest man in Zhongcheng. It is not a simple matter to deal with a little doctor. This time, Dr. Sun was frightened, but he had no choice. Just when he was anxious, he suddenly thought of David, and Dr. Sun hurriedly said, Miss Sue, the young man who just went out, maybe there is a way, I see that guy has 2 strokes. When Dr. Sun said this, Sonia also thought of David, but just now that Dr. Sun looked down on David, but now he praised him, he just wanted David to come over and help him beat the thunder. As long as David starts to heal, even if Ruben is dead, he will not be able to find his responsibility. It is the responsibility of David alone. Sonia hesitated, and finally put Ruben on the chair and rushed out of the private room. At this time, David was sitting on a chair in the corridor, and he knew that Sonia would definitely come out to find him. Seeing that David hadn't left, Sonia hurried over, but just as she was about to open her mouth, she suddenly found that she didn't even know David's name. Please, please save my father. Sonia looked embarrassed and begged to David. David slowly raised his head to look at Sonia, but Sonia didn't dare to look directly into David's eyes. She scolded David just now, but now she came to beg David. You believe that I can save your father, that I am not a liar? David asked. Sonia didn't speak. She didn't know how to answer, because at this moment Sonia didn't fully trust David. She just didn't do it. She was just a dead horse as a living horse doctor. Looking at Sonia's appearance, David smiled, and instead of embarrassing her, he got up and walked towards the private room. Sonia hurriedly followed behind, while that Dr. Sun was sweating profusely and was anxiously walking in the private room. Seeing David coming, Dr. Sun seemed to see a savior. No matter whether David could cure Ruben or not, as long as David took action, his own responsibility would be released. Little brother, it was my fault just now, please save President Su quickly. Dr. Sun also put down his worth and begged David to say. Compared with his own net worth and life, saying a few good things is nothing. David glanced at Ruben and sighed softly, it seems that I can only fight. After David finished speaking, he looked at Dr. Sun and asked, do you still have silver needles? Yes, in the medicine cabinet. Dr. Sun hurriedly took out a package of silver needles and handed it to David. Not enough. David shook his head. Not enough. Dr. Sun was stunned. There are more than 30 silver needles in this pack, isn't it enough? In acupuncture and moxibustion, it is quite remarkable to be able to apply a dozen needles. Even the president of the Chinese Medicine Association, who is known as a genius doctor, can only apply more than 20 needles. More than 30 silver needles are enough. Not enough, I need a lot of silver needles. David said. How much? Dr. Sun asked carefully. 9981. When David's voice fell, Dr. Sun was stunned, and the whole person was stunned. After a while, Dr. Sun's eyes showed a hint of panic, but he didn't say anything, and took out all the silver needles from the medicine box. David took the silver needle and placed Ruben's body flat on the ground. Then he waved his hands, and the silver needle kept piercing into Ruben's body. David's forehead began to sweat, and the whole person looked very tired, and his clothes were soaked. When the last silver needle pierced into Ruben's body, David let out a long sigh, and the whole person seemed to have collapsed and sat directly on the ground. During this period, Sonia kept watching anxiously. She didn't know anything about acupuncture and wanted to ask, but she was afraid of disturbing David. But at this time, Dr. Sun was already stunned on the spot, and his mouth was wide enough to fit an egg. After a while, Dr. Sun changed from shock to excitement, and knelt in front of David with a thud. Dr. Sun's sudden action shocked David and Sonia. Chapter 8. Divine Doctor, please accept me as a disciple. Dr. Sun said, kowtow to David. David opened his mouth, but found that he had no strength at all, and Sonia looked at Dr. Sun in shock. Dr. Sun, what's wrong with you? My dad isn't awake yet. Sonia didn't understand. Her father hadn't woken up yet. Why did Dr. Sun call David a genius doctor? Miss Sue doesn't know anything. The genius doctor just used a 9-turn revitalizing needle. Even the dead can be healed. President Sue will definitely be fine. Dr. Sun explained to Sonia. So smart. Sonia looked at David in disbelief. If what Dr. Sun said was true, then David could really be called a genius doctor. I didn't expect you to know about the Jujuan revival needle. David took a deep breath and said in surprise. This 9-turn revival needle is an ancient acupuncture method that has been lost for a long time. It was learned by David from Irvin. He did not understand how Dr. Sun knew it. The genius doctor. I am Carl Sun, vice president of the Horrendal Traditional Medicine Association. I once saw this acupuncture method in an ancient book, but I didn't expect to see the genius doctor administering acupuncture today, and asked the genius doctor to accept me as a disciple. With that said, Carl started to kowtow to David. David was a little overwhelmed by Carl's behavior. At this moment, a few coughs sounded, and Reuben woke up. Dad. Sonia reacted, and hurriedly stepped forward to help Reuben up, but David grabbed her. Miss Sue, you can't move now, wait until I take out the silver needle from your father's body. David took Sonia's thin hand, which was soft and warm in his hand, which made David's heart agitate, and Sonia seemed to feel the temperature of David's hand, and her face flushed. It's hard work. David hurriedly let go of Sonia, set his mind, and waved his hands gently in front of Reuben. 81 silver needles. The coefficient was sucked into David's palm. That's it. David returned the silver needle to Carl and said to Sonia. At this moment, Sonia didn't dare to have the slightest suspicion of David, and after expressing her thanks, she stepped forward to support Reuben, and tears of excitement were about to flow out. Dad, how are you feeling? Sonia asked while supporting Reuben. I'm fine, I'm fine. Reuben smiled slightly, but when he saw Carl kneeling on the ground, he asked in confusion, what's going on? Sonia could only talk about David's use of the 9-turn revival needle to save him. When Reuben heard it, he was immediately surprised. He felt that David could see the illness in his body, and it should have been 2 strokes, but he didn't expect it to be so powerful that even Carl, the vice president of the Chinese Medicine Association, had to kneel down to apprentice. Little brother, this is the 2nd time you have rescued me. From now on, you are the great benefactor of my Sue family. As long as you say a word, Sue can do it, and I will never refuse. Reuben said excitedly. Mr. Sue is very polite. It's just a little effort. Besides, you have done good deeds for a long time. This is also your blessing. David said lightly, but then the conversation changed. Although I temporarily saved your life with the 9-turn revival needle, if you don't cure your disease, you won't be able to live for 3 months at most. Hearing what David said, Reuben knelt in front of David with a thud. Please save my life, sir. I am willing to pay my life's money. Reuben was frightened, and instead of calling David his little brother, he changed his name to Mr. Chen. He was really afraid that David would not save him. In order to survive, he is willing to give all his family wealth to David. As the richest man in Horrendal, Reuben has a lot of assets. Now he wants to give all of it to David. I am afraid that everyone who sees it will be envious. Mr. Sue doesn't have to be like this. Since I meet you, I will naturally save you. It's just that I still need some rare medicinal materials, so I need you to prepare the medicinal materials. David has no money to buy medicine for Reuben, and the medicinal materials he needs are all invaluable, and most people are really poorly prepared. Sir, just say what you need. Reuben nodded quickly, and then said to Sonia, Sonia, prepare a pen and paper to record it. When Reuben suddenly changed his name to Mr. Chen, he felt uncomfortable, so he said, Mr. Sue, my name is David Chen, you can just call him by his first name. How can that be? Mr. Chen is my savior, and my Sue family will never forget it. Seeing Reuben's stubbornness, David did not insist, but wrote a full prescription with pen and paper and gave it to Sonia. Mr. Sue, most of the medicines on this list are what you need, but a small part is for my mother. My mother is blind. If you want to cure it, you also need some medicines. David followed Reuben truthfully. David's mother, Barbara's eye disease, was blinded because she cried for too long. It is not difficult for David to cure it. It's just that with his current ability, it is still difficult to prepare medicinal materials for treatment, so he simply asked the Sue family to prepare together. But there are 2 things. David worried that the Sue family would not be able to find them, one of which is a brush with a certain spirituality, such as those used by writers for a long time, which have spirituality. Or a brush made of spiritual animal hair can also be used. These spiritual brushes are just one of them. It is also necessary to use cinnabar. Although cinnabar is very common now, the cinnabar that David needs to use is made of lobular red sandalwood or old sandalwood that is more than 100 years old. With the spiritual brush, you only need to tap a few points on Barbara's eyes. After that, you can basically see things. Although David also wrote these two things on the list, he did not expect the Sue family to find these two things. These two things can be met but not sought after, and only those who understand can tell the difference. Chapter 9. Mr. Chen, you can say whatever you want. As long as I can do it, I will never refuse. Reuben said quickly. Mr. Chen, what is the use of the brush and cinnabar on your list? At this time, Sonia asked. After all, writing brushes and cinnabar are not like things that can be used to treat diseases, and these two things are all over the street. Sonia, since Mr. Chen wrote it, it makes sense, so don't talk too much. Reuben glared at Sonia and said. It's okay. David smiled. These two are also used for healing, but these two are not ordinary brushes and cinnabars, they need spiritual brushes and cinnabars. With spirituality. Sonia was blinded this time. Reuben was also confused, they didn't understand what was spiritual at all. Seeing that both of them were blinded, David explained. All things in the world are born and die, and everything has spirituality, even the dead things that people see in the world, such as the table and chairs here, are all there can be spirituality, but that requires particularly harsh conditions and opportunities. Just like this chair I made, if I sit on this chair to practice the exercises for 10 years, 50 years, or even 100 years, this chair will gradually become spiritual. David was afraid that the two of them would not understand, so he could only follow the two of them in a very popular way. Oh, I see. Sonyadinli exclaimed in surprise. Mr. Chen's meaning is just like it was played on TV. A tree in the fairy cave can become spiritual over time, and even transform into a human form. Sonia, don't talk nonsense. Reuben was speechless after listening to Sonia's explanation. In his opinion, there are no gods in this world. What a century it is. Miss Su's explanation is right, that's what it means. David smiled slightly. David didn't believe it before, but after following Urban for 3 years, he realized that there were too many things in this world that he didn't know. Just like the condensing heart technique that the Urban passed on to him, it is a method of cultivating immortals. Reuben smiled awkwardly. I didn't expect that Sonia really explained it correctly. If someone said something about spirituality, immortals, etc., Reuben would definitely sneer, but when David said it, it made Reuben a little shaken. David and Reuben were talking, without even looking at Carl, who was kneeling on the ground. Although Carl is not particularly bad, it is difficult to take responsibility. David didn't want to accept him, and without the permission of the old master, David nor will they accept apprentices casually. After talking for about 10 minutes, David also knew how Reuben was injured. It turned out that when Reuben was young, he was slapped by a business competitor, because there was no trauma, and he was fine after the examination. So he doesn't care. But it didn't take long for Reuben to feel that his body was getting weaker and weaker, and he often had difficulty breathing. However, Reuben was afraid that his family would be worried, so he kept it a secret, which is why Sonia didn't know her father had a hidden illness. David understood as soon as he heard it. The person who injured Reuben must be a warrior who has cultivated inner strength. It seems that he is going to kill Reuben, but Reuben is rich and buys it with heavy gold. Tonic can only last until now. If he hadn't met himself, Reuben would not have survived at all. I beg Mr. Chen to accept me as a disciple. Carl, who was kneeling on the ground, shouted again. At this time, his legs were already numb, accompanied by pain, making Carl very uncomfortable now. David glanced at Carl. Get up, I won't accept apprentices, but if you don't understand something, I can give you pointers. David saw that Carl had been kneeling for so long, and he was sincere, so he agreed to give him instructions, but David would never accept an apprentice. Seeing David say this, Carl was overjoyed and thanked him repeatedly. Thank you, Mr. Chen, thank you, Mr. Chen. Carl stood up slowly, but his legs were numb and painful, making him unable to stand at all. Seeing Carl's situation, David stretched out his hand and tapped on Carl's leg. The pain and numbness disappeared instantly, which shocked Carl. Mr. Su, there are still parents at home. I'm going back. After the medicinal materials are ready, you can call me. David slowly got up and said. David's mother was still at home alone, which made him very uneasy. Mr. Chen, where do you live now? Reuben asked. What's wrong with living in Xingfuli community? David said strangely. Oh, it's nothing, I just have a house that has been idle and useless, so I will give it to Mr. Chen. That place is also very suitable for recuperation. I hope it will be useful to Mr. Chen. Reuben said, and took out a key from his pocket. Then thank you, Mr. Su. David wanted to refuse. He did not seek medical treatment for Reuben, but he thought that his parents lived in that dilapidated house, and he wanted to earn money to buy a house. He was afraid that it would take a while, so he agreed. But when the key was handed over to David, he was stunned. This was the key to the Pinerest Villa. Chapter 10. The Pinerest Villa district is the best community in Horrendal. The whole community is built on the only mountain in Horrendal. The scenery in the community is pleasant and the air quality is particularly good. The people who can live here are either rich or expensive, and they are all upper-class people. Ordinary people, let alone living in the community, can't even pay the property fee. Mr. Su, this house is too expensive, you should take it back. David hurriedly returned the key. Mr. Chen, don't shirk. Does it mean that my life is not worth a house? Reuben smiled slightly. When Reuben said this, David could only accept it, and Reuben took out a bank card and gave it to David, with 10 million in it. David knew that he couldn't escape, so he could only put the bank card in his pocket. Just when David was about to leave, there was a burst of noise from downstairs, it was very loud. David frowned slightly. Seeing David frowning, Reuben immediately called the hotel manager over. What's going on? It's so noisy. Reuben asked. Mr. Su, young Master Xiao of the Xiao family is getting married today, and the wedding banquet will be held in the banquet hall on the second floor, that's why it's so noisy. The manager hurriedly explained to Reuben. When Reuben heard this, he gave up. After all, his hotel is open for business, and when people get married, it is inevitable to make some noise. Mr. Su, farewell. David bowed his hands to Reuben and walked out of the private room. Just after David went downstairs, he met Jordan and walked into the hotel with his bride Delia in his arms. After seeing David, Jordan was stunned for a moment, but then laughed. David, I didn't expect you to come to our wedding, do you want to eat and drink? David glanced at Jordan coldly, did not speak, turned to one side and wanted to leave. Don't go. Jordan blocked David's way, and said mockingly, look at your ex-girlfriend, isn't she beautiful now? Don't you have anything to tell her? Jordan is deliberately making David embarrassed. Brother Lei, ignore him, the time is coming. Delia, who was in Jordan's arms, didn't even look at David, she said to Jordan. Jordan, don't pay attention to this rubbish, you can't miss the hour, you go to the hall, I'll drive this rubbish away. Ethel urged Jordan, then looked at David and said, have you finished this guy? You even chased after you to the hotel, just like your toad, can my daughter like you? Take a photo of yourself, get out of here, don't think about making trouble here. Jia Maimai's words are bitter and mean, and it can be said that every word is punishing. The relatives and friends around them whispered one by one, watching David keep sneering. At this time, David was like a clown jumping off the beam, and was laughed at by everyone. One day, you will all kneel at my feet and beg me. David suppressed the anger in his heart, pushed Jordan away, and walked out. Stop him. Jordan frowned. Today, if you want to participate, you have to participate, and if you don't want to participate, you have to participate. I will let you, a waste, watch your girlfriend marry me. As soon as Jordan spoke, the bald people immediately stopped David. They were beaten at David's house, and they still had grievances in their hearts. Now they just want to take revenge on David. Seeing the bald-headed people holding him viciously, David slowly turned his head to look at Jordan. Are you sure you want me to attend your wedding? Yes, I just let you watch it with your own eyes. I want you to know that if you dare to fight with me, you are not worthy. Jordan sneered. Well, if I were to attend, your wedding wouldn't be held. After David finished speaking, he turned around and walked into the wedding banquet hall on the second floor. There are more than 100 tables in this hall. Ha ha ha, I want to see how you made my wedding fail. Jordan laughed. He didn't believe David's threat at all, but in order to prevent David from making trouble and disturbing everyone's yaxing, Jordan faced that the bald head said, Bald head, bring a few more people and follow that David for me. If he dares to come back, immediately arrest him for me. Young Master Xiao, don't worry, this matter is left to me. The bald head nodded, and there were a few cold rays in his eyes. He was just about to seek revenge on David. In the marriage hall, David found a corner and sat down. The people who can attend the Shao family's son's wedding are either rich or expensive. Therefore, the appearance of David caused many guests in the hall to cast a strange look. At such a luxurious wedding scene, an ordinary young man suddenly appeared, which seemed out of place. But soon, David's identity was spread among the many. In the marriage hall, David found a corner and sat down. The people who can attend the Shao family's son's wedding are either rich or expensive. Therefore, the appearance of David caused many guests in the hall to cast a strange look. At such a luxurious wedding scene, an ordinary young man suddenly appeared, which seemed out of place. But soon, David's identity was spread among the many guests, and this time, there were more eyes on David. Most of them were mocking, and some were sympathetic. It's just that David didn't care about these eyes, sitting alone in the corner, eating the dried fruit on the table, without a trace of expression on his face. The bald head is with a dozen people, standing behind David and staring closely. As long as David dares to make a change, he will shoot without hesitation. Hey, isn't this David? When did you get out of prison? A sarcastic voice sounded. David looked up, and found a woman dressed in enchanting, heavy makeup walking towards David, with a young man following the woman. The woman's voice instantly attracted the attention of the surrounding guests. At first, they only thought that David was the ex-boyfriend of the bride, and they came to see his girlfriend for the last time. Of interest,